Good morning, everyone. My name is JP Harris from Sheehan Finney. I want to thank you all for joining us. We have a few more folks coming in, but we will get started. I want to thank you again for your time this morning. I wish we could all get together in person here at our office. We're looking out over the foliage on this bright day. It would have been a nice setting for all of us, but in fact, if we were all together, we wouldn't have this topic to talk about today. I also want to thank you for giving me an excuse to put on a suit, which I have not had many opportunities to do, and glad to report it still fits, so thank you. This is the first in our series on data security. I wanted to let everyone know we are recording this session, and if we are going to try to answer as many questions as possible at the end, so please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to start to share my screen here. Just wanted to give you a little roadmap of what we're going to talk about today and also what's coming up in the series. Today, we are going to talk about lessons learned over the last 6 months as our firm and other companies have moved to a remote work environment on the theory that we will likely be in this posture for the next several months. And frankly, many employers are now announcing their intentions to continue with remote workforce in some capacity. Workers are going to likely insist on more flexibility. So what Tom and I are trying to do today is combine for you some tips and tricks that have emerged from this little experiment over the last 6 months on both a technological and legal perspective, and see if we can help folks learn from this little experiment and get the most out of the remote work environment. You'll see up on the screen here, this is what we have coming up. We're doing one of these half-hour sessions about every week or so. The next session will deal with cyber insurance. And on November 5th, we are going to talk about privacy policies and compliance. On November 12th, we are going to focus in on vendors as we are all sharing data with third parties. We're going to talk about how can you tell whether those vendors are truly safeguarding your data. And on December 3rd, we're going to close out by addressing hackers and ransomware, what breaches look like, and what it means to respond. So please register for those and tell your friends. So I'm going to introduce myself first, just so you have some perspective on me, and then Tom Mitchell, my co-presenter, will also introduce himself, and then Tom will handle the first section of slides. Again, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A function and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I'm a shareholder at Sheehan Finney and co-chair of the Data Privacy Group. I'm a litigator. I have a full commercial and employment litigation practice. In the mid-2000s, I started to counsel companies on trying to get them to reduce the amount of data that they possess, because I was spending nights and weekends reviewing useless emails for litigation purposes and trying to help companies reduce their litigation costs. So I got into the data retention plan business, if you will. Over the last several years, unfortunately, dozens of our clients have experienced data breaches or incidents. And so I have picked up that part of the practice too, interfacing with insurance companies, being retained by insurance companies to provide notifications and other legal advice. And frankly, about half of our clients' data incidents, they have not had insurance, so we've been helping them. My partner, Doug Verge, also co-chairs the privacy group, and he handles the privacy policy and compliance matters. So that rounds out at least the big sort of core of our group, and we have others that help us out as well. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Tom so he can introduce himself to you, and then he will kick off the next few slides. Tom, you have to unmute yourself, though.
Howdy. My name's Tom Mitchell. I work for Sheehan Finney. I'm the Director of Information Security and Technology. I've been with Sheehan Finney for about 1.5 years, but I have about a 30-year history dealing with computers, technology, everything in between. I'm a lifelong geek when it comes to all things computers and information technology. Going from, a small-time engineer working for a small company all the way through selling the company a few years ago. So let's get going. Next slide, please. So we've got two definitions to look at here as far as where we are today in the world of, we have our remote workers. Those are the folks that you hired that don't have office space, don't come to the office, generally don't make a presence in the office. And my wife is a perfect example of that. She works for a company in Texas. She hasn't been to the office except for, vacation visits and things of that nature in 19 years. And there is no space for her when she does go to the office. She does everything from home and has a nice setup here to do so. Then you have the newly defined work from home all the time folks that, due to COVID, we had to quickly at Sheehan make a shift of taking people who were used to coming to the office every day, had come to the office every day for 5, 15, 20, 50 years, and suddenly set them up at home in order to be productive, usable, use the technology they had at home and be able to be productive and get the stuff done that needed to get done on a day-to-day basis. The hardest part about that was figuring out, what people needed and where they were going to be and how they were going to do their jobs. Next slide, please. So we've got all the computer technology that we provide to a staff member at the office. So be it a desk and a nice chair, computers, dual monitors, wireless mouse and keyboard, printers, scanners, firewalls, security, all of those different pieces, parts that make a person, viable and usable and set up to do what they need to do at the office. Now we've got to transition that to the home environment. It was tough. It was really tough to find people and figure out how it was going to work, that first part. We could get people connectivity, but how did we get them the paperwork that was sitting on their desk or the paperwork they were used to getting in the mail so that we could start to scan that and get that to them at the office? We started using instant messaging programs. So we did have software. We had like Office 365 so that we could do the application piece. We could do the email pieces, but some communication perspective, or some of the communication pieces that we had were, did it go through an email or did it go through an instant messaging system? And then of course, everybody learned the word Zoom. Zoom being the new Google. If we're going to have a virtual meeting, everybody says Zoom it. Can we have a Zoom? Let's turn it into a Zoom, something of that nature. I'm sure WebEx and GoToMeeting are mad that they didn't get turned into a verb the way that Zoom did. So now we're all using Zoom. We're having virtual meetings. We're doing it right now as we speak using the Zoom platform. And it's made us, able to at least see each other and communicate in ways that you lose when you're on the phone or in an email. But part of that is, again, where is everybody? Who's at the office? Who's at home? Are they getting the work done that they need to be getting done? And is it productive for the firm itself? So next slide, please. One of the things that we were kind of prepared for or had set up is that most of our attorneys, we had 60 plus laptops ready to go out the door, and those 60 laptop users already had remote connectivity back into the office. It was the matter of getting the other 60 plus workers, staff members, set up and working through VPN connections, secure remote desktop, or some other method to get them into the files they were used to working on, files they needed to access, their email, printers, scanners, whatever they needed to do. In some cases, folks did not have computers at home, and that wasn't part of our business continuity disaster recovery plan when I sat down and thought about this a year and a half ago. And I wonder how many of y'all had a concept or a thought that you have staff members that don't have internet at home, and you have staff members that don't have a computer. All they have is an iPad. And using an iPad to work remotely on 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, just isn't something that's going to work well. So we ended up giving out a lot more machines than I originally planned, but we had spares in the storage room that we were able to do so. Now that it's been 6 months on, I think if everybody goes back and looks at the supply channel, you couldn't order spare monitors, you couldn't order webcams, computers and laptops and Chromebooks and all of those things were in short supply. And if you did order any, it was going to take weeks to get it. I just spoke with one of our Dell reps, and he said Dell laptops that are being ordered this week are due for delivery end of November, beginning of December. So you have to have a policy now that decides what are you going to allow, how is it going to work, and what are you going to do with your home devices versus personal versus remote, personal versus company owned. And are you going to allow company data to be stored on personal machines? Next slide, please. We ended up having to do a lot of extra training to get folks used to using Adobe Acrobat to perform those merge functions within PDFs. You get 5, 6, 7 PDFs and you had to merge them together. Folks were unaware that you could use Microsoft Word to open and edit a PDF and convert it back to a PDF. Suddenly we were using, file sharing applications when everybody was used to putting things on the network in the G drive or the H drive or places of that nature. Now suddenly we're having to use, OneDrive and Box to make those things happen. Next slide, please. And then there was the cybersecurity training. As you probably saw in the news, there has been a number of serious attacks, primarily against new work from home users who were uncomfortable with the change of working from home, expecting email communications from a variety of people, such as IT, when they might not have generally dealt with IT. And now they're opening up holes into your environment, causing crypto events to occur, allowing the bad guys in through a variety of different means. If you don't have a cybersecurity training ongoing, you need to, because your staff is vulnerable. And then lastly, security. I shouldn't say lastly. In security, what devices are connecting to the company resources? Are you monitoring for which devices are accessing the network through a VPN or through an RDP connection? Do they have antivirus on their home PC? Do you know if they have antivirus? Are you aware of where that PC is going and what it's doing? Those were pieces that we had to use endpoint data protection on in order to start securing some of those personal devices that weren't ours, but we wanted to make sure we're being safe when they connected to company resources. And then disallowing, folks from being able to save locally on their machines. Next slide. And then the most important of all, I try to always finish with backups anytime I talk about anything. But if you're not backing up your data, all the company data, especially the remote workers and whatever they may be working on off-site on a personal device, be it an iPad or a personal laptop or a personal desktop, you need to be capturing that information because it is an asset to the company. If you think about over the last 10 months, Garmin was hacked, 5 county governments, 2 universities, Cognizant, ISS World Property Management, and if you just take that group there, that was $250 million in ransom and fines and revenue lost by these companies because they weren't doing the proper backups in order to survive an encryption event, or a ransomware event. So I ask everyone to talk to their IT folks, ask the question, what tools are deployed to protect you from ransomware? When was the last time you tested your backup and did a full restore? And most critically now is, are you air gapping backups in at least 2 different sections? Air gap, it means you have a backup that's conducted and it immediately is disconnected from all electronic interfaces and set aside in a safe or a fireproof or a filing cabinet that nobody can access without, physically touching it. I'll leave. Yep. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm done. JP, your turn.
Hey, thank you, Tom. I'm going to shift now a little bit from the technological aspect to some of the legal issues and risks that have arisen over the last 6 months that we all need to be mindful of. And the overarching comment, and I hope this is the key takeaway for everyone, is that all of our employment laws, they still apply to remote workers working at home. As an employer, you're obligated to make these laws work at my home office, for example. And we have handbooks and policies and procedures that have been written and utilized by companies for a long time, and the language really speaks to having everybody on site, and those policies and procedures need to be evaluated, and if you're going to persist within a remote workforce. The language needs to change. Employees need to understand that how harassment can manifest itself in a Zoom meeting or through instant messaging, where there's even less formality than we've seen with email traffic. The joke about somebody attending a Zoom meeting with no pants on, that's not going to be funny when that becomes Exhibit A to some discrimination claim. So we've got to rethink how we talk to our employees about these discrimination laws and how they operate, and we have to take a second look at our handbooks and policies to make sure they fit this new environment. As we disperse our workers to new places and we draw on workers from other parts of the country, because we can, when we give flexibility to employees that traditionally live in New Hampshire or Massachusetts, and they want to move to Virginia to be closer to family, they can still be productive, and we allow that to happen. Employers need to realize they are now bringing into play local laws of jurisdictions in which they otherwise would not have really contemplated. There are differences from state to state, even between New Hampshire and Massachusetts on wage laws, for example. Non-compete laws are another good example. That's jurisdiction specific. Many employers choose a particular state's law to govern all of their employment agreements, but that may be harder to justify with a dispersed workforce. So you have to go back to review those and survey the states in which your employees now live. We all need to broaden our compliance review, and that's going to change as people come and go. Virginia will no longer be a state we need to worry about, but then it's South Carolina because somebody moved there. So it's important to dedicate somebody at the company to keep track of the states that are in play and at least identify issues so they can be studied, or you can get legal advice for compliance purposes. As we provide flexibility and allow folks to work from home, we also have to be very mindful about timekeeping and wage and hour compliance. It was hard enough to get people to take meal breaks and not work overtime when you could control their comings and goings and what they did within the premises. But now that they're at home, you have to find new ways to monitor their activities. If you had a physical way of punching in and punching out, that needs to change now, so you can afford an online tool for record keeping. Just remember, it's the employer's obligation to keep those kinds of records. It's a lot easier for employees to check emails from home and work extra hours when their work is always at the dining room table. But that creates wage and hour exposure, and we all need to find ways to modify our policies and procedures to make sure we mitigate that risk. Another important factor that hasn't gotten too much attention yet, but OSHA and workers' comp laws, they all apply to the home work environment. Employers have a responsibility to afford a safe working environment, even at home. So the ergonomics or the repetitive motion injuries that you are able to minimize because you can control the physical space or provide stand-up desks or resources, or you can put the monitors at the right height. You can do all that in your workplace. It's a lot harder to make that happen at home. And Tom was talking about just getting some of the resources that you typically provide in a workplace, getting them home. For myself, I sat at a dining room table for 3 months. We had to, I couldn't sit at my dining room chair week after week. That would not have worked. You have to think through those issues. And your policies and procedures need to be amended accordingly because you're responsible, even in the home work environment. I'm going to report to you a case. I wish it was a joke, but it isn't. Workers' comp laws apply even to fall hazards at home. An employee tripped over a dog at home, and that was compensable. If an employee is working from home, but they leave the house to run a work errand, for example, deliver mail to the post office, and they're injured, that's not commuting. That's performing a work function. So the workers' comp laws apply to this home environment, and there are a few tips that you can think about. In this environment, it's not practical to send somebody to sort of inspect the workspaces at my home office, for example, but you can set up policies and procedures where employees send you photographs of what their home office environment looks like, so that you get a sense of, do they have the proper monitors, and do they have sufficient ergonomic safeguards? Have they removed trip hazards? And you can also require them to notify you of changes. If their college student comes home and now the office turns back into the kid's bedroom and now they're working at the dining room table, you need to keep track of that information because you're ultimately responsible. The hiring and onboarding process obviously has changed. When interviewing and making hiring decisions remotely, I will confess that every time I'm watching TV and there's somebody on a news show or something, and you can peer into their back, what's on their bookshelf. You learn a lot about folks by peering into their background, or you hear the things going on in the background with kids or spouses or whatever. Some of that's information you probably wish you wouldn't have available to you in the hiring decision, but you need to come up with policies and procedures to ensure that the hiring is done the way you would do it if somebody came in for interviews. Onboarding and training and orientation, all the delivery of all of that needs to change as well. And so your policies and procedures about providing training, those should be amended to reflect the new reality of folks not coming in for that training necessarily. And the big one is integrating people into the company culture. That's particularly difficult when we're not in the same space, and enforcing company policies when I'm at my home office is difficult. It's a different challenge for supervisors. Supervisors need to have perhaps some additional training if they're going to conduct an investigation, for example. If you have an incident and now they're collecting information and interviewing folks online, that's different than sitting across the desk from somebody where you can size them up and follow up more easily on questions, read body language better. Those are all just a new reality, and your policies and procedures should be changed to reflect that. Departing employees are a particular challenge now too, because as Tom mentioned, you've now got company property and company data offsite. So you could theoretically have someone you've hired, perhaps they came in occasionally for orientation and training, but have largely worked offsite, and now they've given you notice that they're going to leave. They may be in another state or jurisdiction. Keeping track of the property that they possess is particularly difficult, but getting it back is also difficult. So if your policies and procedures don't give you the right mechanisms to collect data, if it's on a home computer or a personal device, that's problematic. But you want to still conduct your exit interviews as you would. You just might need to tinker your procedures to, if you have checklists or other forms that need to be signed, obviously you need to deliver those and get them back. And Tom will, I'm sure, would highlight, terminating remote access is obviously key. Once they're gone, you need to sort of close off those access points. So if we shift now a little bit from the employee context and what it really means to conduct business, this is largely a preview of what's to come. Whereas you used to deliver your goods and services in a physical space, you used to try to draw people into your space to interact with them. Now you're undoubtedly looking for new ways to deliver. And that means more of an online presence. It's different data that you're now collecting that you need to keep and protect and safeguard and ultimately purge. You have new vendors that you're dealing with as you found new ways to deliver your message, your goods and services, so that we're going to spend an entire session about vendors. Your typical contracts may need to be changed. Your terms of use, your standard terms and conditions, if they speak to somebody physically interacting with your staff and now you're delivering goods in a different way, you might need to revisit those. And the bottom one is also sort of a preview of what's to come. You're likely collecting different types of data than you did before, and probably more electronic data than you used to collect. And so in a future session, we'll talk about the privacy regulations and compliance issues that are attendant to now all this new data that you have you've collected. So we have come to, Tom, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to sort of tack on to what I mentioned there. We've come close to the end, and I'm just checking the chat box to see if the Q&A box.
No, I think you hit it all very well. Thank you.
I don't see any questions here. I'll just make one comment about the, Tom had a slide up about bring your own device policies, and there was a time 10 years ago where that was really in vogue to allow users to make the choice to use their own devices, and it's caused strain on people like Tom that had to sort of support a whole bunch of devices that were not company owned. I think for security reasons, there's been kind of a shift more recently back to supplying company devices where you can exert more control. But we're going to be in this hybrid model, if you will, where there's going to be a mixture of personal devices and company devices, and having a robust policy to give the company authority to remote wipe personal devices, which can be problematic if you're going to lose all the photographs you have on your iPhone, for example. I mean, working out those mechanics with your employees in advance and dealing particularly with the departure. How are you going to get your company data back and assure yourself that you have received all of your company data? Working out those in advance are particularly important.
A key piece there is, from the compliance perspective, BYOD doesn't necessarily work if you have to meet PCI or HIPAA or ISOC or the major compliance pieces. BYOD is not allowed.
Right.
They're moving away from it because of that personal private overlap.
So we did have one question just come in about working from home. And the question is, it appears employers have responsibility for employee safety while working at home. Can you elaborate on how the employer can exert control? Is the only real control the threat of discharge to get the employee to adhere to company policies? Well, the one tip that I've seen is this, insisting on photographs so you get a sense of the physical space. You get sort of sign off or certifications in writing about maintaining a separate space, removing trip and fall hazards and those kind of things. With the power of Zoom now, I suppose you could set up a supervisor meeting and have them, turn the camera around so you get a sense of where they work. It is true that reserving the right to discipline is the principal measure by which employers enforce all their policies. If you can't send somebody out to sort of do a spot inspection, which is dicey for a lot of reasons, even in healthy times, your right to discipline is about the best mechanism you're going to have. And I encourage your workers' comp carrier may have some useful resources for you in that regard too, because they want to help you mitigate this risk. they may have some other suggestions for you as well. Don't see any other questions. We've come right to 30 minutes. Feel free to reach out to Tom or to me if you have specific questions in between, and we really hope we've imparted some knowledge today. Our next session will be on October 22nd. It will deal with cyber insurance. So I hope you're able to attend. So please register just as you did for this one, and we hope to see you then. So thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.